So everybody's good? Okay. Okay, so I will just repeat the last two slides. The movement met with strong resistance, as you can imagine. Things like that always do. So, and I just want to give you two examples of that, just to give you an idea how this initiative was met by different people at different times. In 1895, motion for women's suffrage is presented for the first time in federal parliament. It was presented by Nicholas Flood Davin, a conservative MP from Saskatchewan. So again, this is the Prairies province, and we see that it used to be much more liberal than what we think about it now. Now we have a very different stereotype of those regions. So Nicholas Flood Davin introduces a motion to allow women to vote. And this motion is defeated, 105 to 47. And why is it defeated? Well, the opponents say that a woman's proper sphere is the home. And then fast forward 30 years, 1922. So we're in Quebec now. Liberal Premier of Quebec, Louis-Alexandre Taschereau, I hope I pronounced his name correctly, says that women will not get the provincial right to vote as long as he is in office. And this is one of the rare cases when a politician delivers on his promise. So we remember that women in Quebec got the right to vote in 1940 only. So these are just two examples, but there were numerous other examples throughout those decades of struggle, and they came in very different shape and form. So not necessarily from the federal government or from provincial government, from individuals, and also, sadly, from women as well. Okay, so we'll end the first part at this point, and we'll move on to the next one. So should I just keep going? Okay. You know, maybe you should start the new one, because I'm not sure I can make it within 15 minutes. It'll be cut off again. That's fine? Okay, good. Okay, so we're moving on then. Okay, so the next part of my presentation concerns the person's case, or as it is known in the legal history of Canada, Edwards versus Attorney General of Canada. And the reason I wanted to talk about this case, apart from the fact that it is related to the suffrage movement in Canada, is because this is a very famous reference. It's something that comes up now and then. And I found in my own experience that people, myself included, have a big idea of what the case involves and who were those people and what the story was about. And when this reference is made, they sort of have a vague notion of what is being talked about. So I thought it was useful to include the story in my presentation. So I'll start from the end. So what is this case? This is a constitutional case. The ruling came down on October 1929. It's a constitutional case that decided that women were persons, and more than that, they were qualified persons, and thus eligible to sit in the Canadian Senate. So here we're going from the right to vote to the right to be elected, or the right to be appointed. Okay, so this case is also known as the case of the famous five. Those women from Alberta: Irene Parlby, Louise McKinney, Nellie McClung, Henrietta, Muir Edwards, and Emily Murphy. So whenever you hear one of those five names or the five of them together, you know the reference. Irene Parlby was elected to the Alberta legislature in 1921. Louise McKinney became a member of the Alberta legislature in 1917. She was the first woman to sit in any legislature in the British Empire. Nellie McClung was a novelist, a legislator. She was elected to the Alberta legislature in 1921. Henrietta Edwards was a student of law. She published the first Canadian magazine for working women. She helped establish the National Council of Women in 1890. And Emily Murphy was a police magistrate for the city of Edmonton. She was a judge, basically. Simplifying somewhat. Okay, so, and I'm sure you have seen this picture a lot. This is a sculpture. There is one in Calgary, for sure, I know that. because I lived in Calgary, I know the sculpture. I think there is one in Ottawa as well. So these are the famous 5. These are these 5 women, and this is the victory in this famous, the person's case. Okay, so what was the story behind it? Okay, now going back to 1916. Women's Court was established by the Attorney General of Alberta, Charles Wilson Cross. Now, what is a women's court? There was a story behind, there was a need to create, and I think now I have more time, I can actually tell the story. So the story was this. There was a trial in Edmonton. Several women were tried for prostitution. And Emily Murphy, along with a group of other women, were ejected from the courtroom because they said that the story and the nature, the subject of the trial was inappropriate for mixed company. So those women, led by Emily Murphy, were outraged. And Emily Murphy appealed to the Attorney General, to Charles Wilson Cross, and she said that if there is subject that's inappropriate for mixed company, there must be a special court presided over by a woman to try other women. And much to her surprise, the Attorney General agreed, and not only did he establish such a court, he appointed Emily Murphy to be the presiding judge in this court. So this is a special court that presided over by women to try other women. So, but what happened on the first day? Her authority was challenged by the defendant's lawyer because she was not a person. And why was she not a person? Okay, so there is this law, the British North America Act of 1867, where the word persons, the plural persons, is used to describe more than one person. And then the pronoun he is used to refer to one person. And based on that, many argue that according to the Act, only a man could be a person in legal terms. So whenever a reference was made in legal terms to a qualified person, or a person who has a right to vote, to run for office, to be a judge, whenever there is a reference person, it was understood to be a man. And this was the argument that the defendant's lawyer made in this case to challenge her authority, to challenge her verdict. Okay, so what happened next? In 1917, the Supreme Court of Alberta rules that women are persons. So obviously she appealed this ruling, that she created a lot of noise. And the Supreme Court of Alberta backed up the women, and they said, no, women are persons. What happens after that? After that, Emily Murphy wants to become a senator. She puts her name forward as a candidate for the Canadian Senate. Robert Borden, the Prime Minister at the time, rejects her candidacy because women are not persons. So again, this judgment was overruled at the provincial level, on the level of Alberta, but as soon as the issue came up on the federal level, she encountered the same problem. So this British common law ruling from 1876 states that, and you're going to love that, women are eligible for pains and penalties, but not rights and privileges. Basically, if you're a woman, you can be punished, but you cannot be rewarded. You have obligations, but you don't have rights. Plain and simple. Wonderful, right? So 1917, over 100 years ago. Okay, so what happens next? 10 years go by. So, and I'm frankly, I'm not sure why it took 10 years, what were the things that were happening during that period of time. But in 1927, in Edmonton, in Alberta, Emily Murphy assembles the famous 5 groups. So those 4 other women that I named at the beginning join her. And on behalf of the group, the federal government refers the following question to the Supreme Court of Canada for legal clarification. So the procedure was that anybody can submit a petition or submit a question to the federal government, and the federal government will refer this petition or this question to the Supreme Court of Canada for legal clarification. So this was actually, I'm omitting some details. There were 2 questions first, and there were 3 questions, and then they were going back and forth, the group of 5 and the federal government, and they settled eventually on this one question. Does the word persons in section 24 of the British North America Act of 1867 include female persons? Yes or no? Plain and simple. So that question is put before the Supreme Court of Canada. And what happens in 1928? The Supreme Court of Canada, all 5 justices, hold that persons did not include women. And here again, qualified means qualified for what? Eligible for what? So every time there is a legal document that makes a reference to a person qualified for something, it's always understood as referring to a man, never to a woman. Which means that women may not be considered qualified persons to be appointed to the Senate of Canada in this particular case, because this is the inciting incidents. This is where it all began. So they're not eligible to do many other things, but in particular to be senator. Okay, so the 1928. Then what happened? 1929, the famous 5 appealed the case at the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council. So at the time, this was the court of last resort. It was in London, in Great Britain. And the Lord Chancellor, Viscount-Saint-Guy, again, I hope I pronounced the word correctly, there is no pronunciation guide for English names, revised the decision of the Supreme Court of Canada. So he looked at it, and he said, he uttered the following famous words. The exclusion of women from all public offices is a relic of days more barbarous than ours. To those who ask why the word person should include females, the obvious answer is, why should it not? So the court of last resort at the time overturned the ruling of the Supreme Court of Canada, and according to this ruling, women are considered qualified persons whenever there is a mention of person, a reference to person in any legal act. It must be understood from this point onward that it refers to men and women. I'm almost done. So what was the outcome of that? Despite the ruling, Emily Murphy was not appointed to the Senate of Canada, and I can't tell you why, just because I don't know. I didn't do enough research to find out. The first female senator was Karine Ree Wilson, and she was appointed on February 15, 1930. So a few months after the ruling. And what happens in 2018? There are 43 female senators, or slightly over 45%. And what I did, I actually did a manual count, so I may be off by a couple. So I just went to the Senate webpage and I clicked the women senators, female senators, and they gave me a list of all the female senators. So this is the situation between, this is a 100-year span, 1917, 1916, 2018. So that's the progress. So I don't know, how did we do? You tell me. So this is a very brief summary of the person's case. Thank you.